Welcome to Season 3 of the Feral Folklorist with me, Papa G. It's where folklore, history, and real magic come together. This season, we're digging into more hauntings, witchcraft, old legends, and stories people have carried with them for generations. And now, the Feral Folklorist has a sister podcast, Feral by Night, created for those of you who want something darker. Spooky tales, eerie encounters, and stories made for listening after the sun goes down. With Feral by Night taking us deeper into the storytelling side of things, we've revamped the Feral Folklorist just a little, giving you more of the history and evidence, background, and strange details behind every story we tell. And a huge thank you to everyone who listened, shared the show, and helped us keep growing. Season 3 starts right here, right now. The most famous version of the Bell Witch story ends with a small bottle of dark liquid and a dead cat. By December of 1820, John Bell had been sick for months. His family said painful spells twisted his face and made it hard for him to eat or speak. Then they found a vial in the house containing something nobody recognized. Before they let it near John, they tested a little on a family cat. The cat twisted, jumped, and died. The fullest version of the story, written down decades later, says the voice claimed responsibility for the liquid. It said it had already given John a dose while he slept, and John Bell was dead the next morning. Nobody wrote that scene down, though, in 1820. The bottle, the poisoned cat, and the voice claiming murder all entered into print later. By then, the Bell Witch had already grown from knocks on a farmhouse wall into something that could pray, it could gossip, it would argue over scripture, attack a young girl, call itself Kate, and threaten John Bell openly. So how did a few strange sounds inside a Tennessee farmhouse become a talking presence people travel for miles to question? Why did it choose John Bell and his daughter Betsy for the worst attacks? And how did the name of the living neighbor, Kate Batts, get pulled into a haunting she may have had nothing to do with? But before the voice began answering questions and speaking, the Bells would see animals that didn't look right or hear something moving through their bedrooms after dark. Before long, ministers and skeptics and relatives and curiosity seekers were sitting in the Bell house waiting for a voice with no body attached to it. The voice had favorites. It praised Lucy Bell, tormented Betsy, and called John Old Jack. It could sing a hymn in one room and curse somebody in the next. And once people learned that it would answer questions, they kept asking. Every answer gave the voice another chance to change its story, embarrass somebody in the room, or add one more incident that would have been repeated long after the Bells were gone. I'm Papa G, and this is the Feral Folklorist. Tonight we're talking about the Bell Witch, Tennessee's talking haunting, the family that would talk back to it, the woman whose name became attached to it, and the little dark bottle said to have finished John Bell off for good. Years before we get to the part of the story about that little bottle, John Bell saw something moving between the rows of his cornfield. He described an animal with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Bell raised his gun and fired, but the creature ran off and disappeared. John and Lucy Bell's farm was along the Red River in northern Tennessee, and they'd been there since 1804. Now, the area is about 40 miles northwest of Nashville. But nothing about the place suggested people would one day travel there to hear something invisible speak. A few days after John's strange animal, one of the bellboys saw an enormous bird perched on a fence. He went inside for a gun, but it was gone when he returned. Then Betsy Bell saw a little girl in a green dress swinging from the limb of an oak tree near the house. When she brought someone back to look, the girl had disappeared. The trouble moved inside after dark. Someone knocked against the outside walls, so John stepped into the yard to catch whoever was doing it, but found no one there. The knocks returned on other nights, shifting from the door to the walls and then to upstairs. Two of the boys began hearing what sounded like a rat chewing hard against a bedpost. They dragged the bed away from the wall and checked the wood. There were no bite marks, no holes, no rat. So they got back in bed, and the gnawing started again. Soon the family was hearing scratches across the floor, like something heavy dropped in an empty room, and what sounded like a chain being dragged over the boards. When they followed one noise, another started somewhere else. Chairs overturned, bed covers slid towards the floor, hair was pulled. The children were pinched, they were slapped. But Betsy received the worst of it. She was about 12 when the disturbances began. In the fuller family account of what happened, something would strike her face and tangle her hair or scratch her skin, and it would keep her awake for hours. Moving her to another room or even to another house didn't stop it. The attacks were said to follow her wherever she went. No, we don't have an account written night by night in the Bell House. Most of the story comes from M.V. Ingram's 1894 book, which drew from family memories and local tradition that was recorded decades later. For a while, John Bell kept the trouble quiet until one day when he asked a neighbor, James Johnson, to spend the night. Johnson searched the rooms, read from the Bible, he even sang a hymn, and prayed for the cause of the disturbance to reveal itself. But the presence didn't leave. The story says it repeated the hymn and Johnson's prayer back in his own voice. The sounds gradually became words. At first, the voice was faint and hard to understand. Then it grew clear enough to answer questions. It quoted scripture and argued religion, copied local voices, passed along neighborhood gossip, and sang during prayer meetings. One story even says it repeated 2 sermons preached 13 miles apart on the same Sunday, each one in the preacher's own voice. Once it could answer, though, visitors started coming. Ministers and skeptics and curiosity seekers would fill the Bell House. Some wanted to pray over it, and some wanted to expose a trick. Others wanted an answer they could repeat when they got home, because everyone loves a good story. An 1866 history of Robertson County already said people had traveled hundreds of miles to witness the Bell Witch. That account described a female voice, conversations with visitors. There was missing sugar and spilled milk and quilts pulled from bed and children slapped and pinched while the presence laughed. Now, as we've said, the voice had favorites because it really did not like John Bell, and it threatened to kill him. And it would also torment Betsy and pushed itself into her courtship with Joshua Gardner. Now, Lucy Bell was treated differently. The story says the voice would praise her, called her a good woman. It would sing hymns to her, and sometimes brought her fruit. Whatever it was, it didn't treat everyone alike. Lucy received hymns, and Betsy received blows. Betsy's relationship with Joshua became part of the nightly performance. In the version that became famous, the voice opposed the match and repeatedly ordered Betsy not to marry him. Visitors could sit inside her family home and hear an unseen speaker giving instructions about her future. So Betsy and Joshua eventually ended the relationship. That part changed as the story traveled. An 1856 newspaper version accused Betsy herself of being a ventriloquist and said the voice would remain until she married Joshua. The later version says the opposite. Betsy is the victim, and the voice fights the marriage. So somebody changed the witch's opinion along the way of this story. Andrew Jackson doesn't know the story until much later, in a letter printed in Ingram's 1894 book. The letter says Jackson came from Nashville with several men and a wagon loaded with supplies. Near the Bell farm, the wagon stopped on level ground, and the horses strained. The men pushed, but nothing moved until a voice from the roadside gave them permission to continue. That night, one of Jackson's men claimed he was a professional witch layer. He carried a pistol loaded with a silver bullet and bragged that he could finish the trouble. But the pistol wouldn't fire. The voice mocked him, beat him, and drove him out of the house. Jackson supposedly found the whole thing hilarious. It's a fine story, but there isn't any known confirmation that Jackson actually visited the Bells. The account was written down decades later by a man repeating what his grandfather had told him. It belongs to the legend, but it doesn't prove Jackson ever actually went to the farm. Then, John Bell's health began to fail. He began suffering painful spells that affected his face and made it difficult to eat and speak because his tongue would swell. And by December of 1820, he was confined to bed and needed someone nearby. After the cat died, the family threw the remaining liquid into the fire. They say it burned with a blue flame. And the next morning, on December 20th, 1820, John Bell was dead. The voice was said to celebrate. After the burial, the family and the neighbors were leaving the grave. It began singing an old drinking song, "Row me up some old brandy-o." Those details, though, the bottle, the cat, the blue flame, and the funeral song, belong to the fuller version written down later. The shorter 1886 account doesn't include them. It does show that before Ingram published his book, Robertson County already knew the Bells as the family troubled by an invisible female presence that would talk, attack, and it drew crowds. Ingram's 1894 version, though, gave the presence a much larger history and a bigger voice. It's said to have preyed and gossiped and chose favorites and interfered with the marriage, humiliated a future president, and claimed responsibility for John Bell's death. But when visitors asked what the voice was, its answer kept changing. The voice called itself a spirit that had once been happy, but had been disturbed. Another answer tied it to bones removed from a burial place and a missing tooth beneath the Bell house. It sent people looking for buried money, and at one point, it claimed to be one of the 7 spirits and offered names such as Three Waters and Black Dog. One version gives the house a whole crowd of spirits, including one that called itself Mathematics. The longer the questioning went on, the less useful the answers became. Then came the name that lasted. After being pressed to identify itself, the voice reportedly called itself Old Kate Batts's Witch. The wording mattered because it didn't say, "I am Kate Batts." It called itself Kate Batts's Witch, which could mean a spirit she owned or a spirit she sent, or an accusation aimed at somebody the neighborhood already knew. Mary Catherine Batts, or Kate, was a real woman. She lived nearby with her husband Frederick, and she was still alive when people were connecting her name to the Bell house. Later stories turned her into John Bell's bitter enemy and gave her a quarrel over land or money. The dispute we can actually trace involved John Bell and Benjamin Batts over the sale of an enslaved person, and later storytellers tangled that quarrel and handed it to Kate herself. That's how a living woman becomes a witch without casting anything. She was described as loud and coarse and a peculiar person who was a little bit difficult. Those are judgments about whether people liked her. They aren't proof that she was sent an invisible thing into another family's house. But once the voice used her name, the accusation became useful. Every argument Kate had ever had could now be pulled into the haunting. Her temper became evidence. Her reputation became evidence. Even the fact that people already disliked her made the accusation easier to repeat. Kate didn't have to enter the Bell house or lay a hand on Betsy. The voice had said her name, and later storytellers did all the rest. A name gives people something they can actually address. They might command it or pray against it or curse it. They might bargain with it or warn somebody else about it. Something is in the house, it's a hard story to pass along. But when you say, Kate is doing this, the story travels much faster. Visitors still wanted proof that they could put their hands on, though. One story says sticks and stones came flying from the roadside thickets at the bellboys. They marked several of the sticks before throwing them back, and the same marked pieces came flying out again. That is a plain country test. Mark the object, throw it back, and see whether the same thing returns. Now, William Porter tried to go a little bit further. He claimed the presence climbed into bed with him and wrapped itself inside the covers. Porter grabbed the bundled quilt and started carrying it towards the fireplace. His plan was simple. If the cloth could hold the thing, fire might finish it. But before he reached the hearth, the bundle became too heavy to carry. Then came a smell so foul that Porter dropped it and ran. When he returned, the quilt was lying there with nothing inside it. Trap it, carry it, burn it. That's folk magic going on right there. But the plan failed. But the logic behind it's easy to follow. The presence touched beds and clothes and food and bodies, and Porter treated it as if it were something physical enough to catch. Dean was an enslaved man on the Bell farm, and when he walked at night to go and visit his wife, he said a strange dog had met him on the road. Now, some versions gave the animal 2 heads. It followed him, blocked him, or vanished near the end of the walk. Dean's wife, also named Kate, made him a witch ball to carry. In Ingram's book, the charm contained hair, foxfire, brimstone, and other materials wrapped together for protection. Basically, she had made him a mojo bag. She made it, Dean carried it, and that difference matters. The charm traveled with him because the trouble met him away from the house. That's practical folk magic. Protection belongs where the danger appears. So a doorway charm stays at the door, and road protection rides in your pocket. The story says the witch ball helped Dean, but it also angered the presence. Because while a magical working can do its job properly, that doesn't mean it makes whatever's on the other side happy about it. The Bells and their visitors kept trying different ways to deal with it. Prayer treated the presence as a spiritual enemy. Those marked sticks tested whether it could handle physical objects, and Porter tried to trap and burn it. Dean carried protection because his danger waited on the road outside the house. But none of those actions settled what they were dealing with. Spirit, witch, animal, buried dead, a whole crowd of invisible beings. Kate Batts's work. A spirit with a half a dozen names is hard to tell a neighbor about. But, like we said, a witch named Kate is easy. Years later, though, the story gave that witch a return date, and then gave newspapers more than one chance to announce she was due back. Before the voice disappeared in 1821, it reportedly promised Lucy Bell that it would return in 7 years. The family story says it came back in 1828, right on time. John Bell was dead, Betsy was married and had left the house, and the younger Bells were the ones waiting for the witch. The return lasted only a few weeks, though. The voice talked about religion and the spirit world and events it claimed were still to come. This time, the story doesn't describe crowds gathering at the house, and after several weeks of conversation, the voice disappeared again. Nobody wrote that visit down in 1828. It survived through the family tradition that preserved the witch's long conversations and prophecies. Then the story gave Kate another appointment. In 1934, John Bell's great-grandson Charles Bailey Bell published his own version of the family story, and he said the spirit had promised in 1828 to return after 107 years. That places the next visit in 1935. Newspapers repeated the prophecy, and reporters looked towards Adams, Tennessee. People waited. The years passed without a convincing sign from Kate, though. They might have ended the return story, but Nashville columnist T.H. Alexander found another way to count. On January 3, 1937, he told readers of the Tennessean that the witch had left in 1827 and promised to return 110 years later. By his arithmetic, Kate hadn't missed her date. She was due that year. Alexander later admitted he didn't believe in ghosts. He did know that the Bell Witch made a fine newspaper column, and Adams soon had fresh stories to offer. Lewis Garrison, who owned the land around the Bell Witch Cave, reported strange noises coming from inside. Bell descendants described something rubbing against a house, or a piece of paper was said to fly through one door and return through another. Somebody heard faint music from a piano when nobody was playing. Then came the Wiener Roast. On July 29th, members of the local Epworth League gathered in a quarry near the cave. They joked about the Bell Witch while they ate. Somebody looked up and saw what appeared to be a woman sitting on the cliff above them, and the group scattered. A minister returned to investigate and said the woman was only moonlight falling across a rock. The explanation had one problem, though. The newspaper noted that hardly any moon had been visible that night. So while Adams watched the cliffs, WSM produced a 40-minute Bell Witch radio program with actors and music and sound effects. On Halloween, a stage production called The Return of the Bell Witch opened in Nashville. People didn't have to travel to the Bell Farm anymore. They could sit beside the radio and wait for the voice. The haunting had moved from a farmhouse in a cave into broadcast entertainment, complete with actors supplying the words and sound effects, including a bunch of knocks. Now, not everyone enjoyed seeing the family history turned into a public event. One of Betsy Bell's descendants wrote to the Tennessean and asked the newspaper to stop printing what he considered foolishness about his family. To him, the witch wasn't a Halloween character. It was a public story still wearing his family's name. For the descendant, the return year wasn't harmless Halloween fun. Reporters had a ghost story, and Adams had visitors. Radio had a Halloween program. His family still had its name attached to the witch. The year ended without proof that the Bell Witch had returned. A date in the newspaper had already sent people back to the cave and the cliff, listening for the witch. Now we're at the part of the podcast where we give you a little bit of magical advice in case something like this were to ever happen to you. Now, the Bell story is full of people asking the presence to prove itself and repeat a voice or perform for one more visitor. But if you have an unwanted presence that answers you back, you want to do the opposite. Stop feeding the conversation. Give it one road out, clear the rooms behind it, and close the house with protection. The bells didn't leave as a cleansing ritual, though. That's why we're going to turn to a traditional form of magical work that uses outward sweeping and cedar and vinegar and prayer and iron. So you do all of this in the daylight so you can see every room and finish it before dark. And what you're going to need is a clean broom, a bucket of warm water, a handful of salt, a little splash of vinegar, a handful of fresh cedar chips, and 2 square iron nails. And then you would also use a Bible or prayer book from whatever your own tradition is. You close every outside door and window except the front door. Open the interior doors to make one clear path to that entrance. Scratch or bend the cedar to release its scent, then add it to the warm water with salt and vinegar. Salt marks boundaries in magic, and vinegar is used to cut and clear the unwanted influence from the house. Cedar, it cleanses and it guards, and the iron stays behind to guard the house after the cleansing is finished. You would read Psalm 91 over the bucket, or a protective prayer from your own tradition, and begin in the room farthest from the front door. And you begin sweeping towards the hallway. Continue through the house, always moving in the direction of the open entrance. Don't sweep in circles, and don't carry dirt back to the rooms you've already cleared. In each room, say something like, "What has no right to remain here must leave with this broom." Don't use our names. Don't use our voices. You cannot use our prayers. Go out by the open door and do not return. You sweep the dirt across the front threshold and gather it outside. Take the unused cedar chips and dip them into the wash and return to the farthest room. Brush the wash against the inside of the window ledges and every outside door frame as you work towards the front of the house again. And at each window say something like, "No strange voices enter here." At each door say, "No harmful thing can cross here." You wash the front threshold, step outside, brush the wash away from the house, and say, "What has been put out will remain out." Then you pour the remaining wash onto the bare earth away from the front step. Put all of the used cedar with the swept dirt and carry it off the property for disposal. Step back inside and close the front door. You would then drive 1 square iron nail partway into the wooden trim above the front door, leaving the head visible. Drive the second one the same way above the doorway of the room where the trouble was the strongest. One guards the entrance, the other closes the place where the presence gathered. Now, if you can't put nails into the trim, lay each nail flat on top of the door frame and secure it so it can't fall. Leave both nails in place until you move or deliberately end the protection. Don't remove them just to test whether the presence is still there. From that point forward, don't call it by name. Don't ask it why it left or whether it's left. Don't replay recordings you made or imitate its voice or invite it to prove to you that your work had failed. The closing depends on ending the conversation. Rinse the bucket and the broom outside, then put them away. Close every interior door that is normally kept closed and return the house to ordinary use. The dirt's gone, the wash is poured out, the cedar has left the property, and the iron stays behind. And now that the front door's closed, the work is finished, just in case you ever had a similar Bell Witch problem. I'm Papa G, and this has been the Feral Folklorist. Next time, we're talking about Baba Yaga's house, the witch at the edge of the woods. But until next time, if something in an empty room calls your name, don't answer back. If you'd like to hear the After the Show episode where I go deeper into the folklore, spill a little extra dirt, and sometimes rant just a bit, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. You can find the official site for the podcast at feralfolklorist.com. And if you need spell supplies for any of the workings we talk about on the show, our metaphysical shop, Roman G's Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromagees.com.